Are we good to go?
Yep. Hi,
Oh,
everyone, and welcome, Nick. Today we're going to be talking about the basics for branding for your law firm. And Nick is our director of client relations. So he's an expert on that topic, actually. And I hope everyone enjoys this and learn to learn.
thank you. Yeah, I look forward to discussing this today. So I'm going to share my screen. Can everyone see my screen? All right. So
Yes.
Great. Okay, cool. So yeah, today I'm just going to walk through the basics of branding. This is most of this is not going to be earth-shattering, but it is really important to understand and discuss, and sort of always come back to this because all marketing efforts and all business efforts fundamentally do at some point come down to branding. And it's something I really love working on and always have with clients. And so it's really fun to dig into this with people and help them understand what, how branding works, what its role is, and how they benefit from it. And when branding is done right, you will see the changes in your business. It can be pretty profound. Let me dive right in. So the things we'll cover, I'm going to talk about just brand defined very quickly, the importance of brand, the elements of brand, the difference between internal and external branding. Then we'll actually discuss some different kinds of branding exercises. So looking at competitive landscape, SWOT analysis, customer segments, customer journeys, brand archetypes. So I'm going to dive right in. So what is a brand? And this is an incredibly dry definition, but I thought I'd start here. A brand is a name, term, design, symbol, or any other feature that identifies one seller's good or service as distinct from those of other sellers. So that's about as boring a description of a brand as you can get. The goal of a brand is that it's not boring, but carries some meaning. But what you can take away from this is that brand is an identity. It's what you how you see yourself and how others see you. So why is that important for a business? Again, to some people this may be obvious, and to others it may not be as obvious. The way I like to illustrate how a brand is important and what role it plays is through real world examples at the personal level. So corporations are not, people in the sense that we interact with each other as people, but the concept of identity operates in some similar ways in personal life versus in corporate life, or as how an entity presents itself to the world. Of course, major differences in many ways, but there are some really helpful analogies, and one of them is that I like to use is job interviews. It's a great way to imagine how personal branding works, and then from that you can extrapolate how branding works at the corporate level. So we're going to do a little thought experiment, a very simple one. We're going to interview at Merrill Lynch today. We are one of these two people. Which one do we hope we are when we show up to the Merrill Lynch interview, where we are trying to get some management position, dealing with tons of money, and our clients need to trust us immensely. Who could guess which one of these people is more likely to get that job? Okay, I won't make you actually say it. It's the guy on the right. Obviously, this is meant to be stark. Yeah. This is not a trick question. So in this instance, the audience is Merrill Lynch. If we're going with the analogy, the company or the entity would be one of these two people. They're trying to sell themselves to Merrill Lynch as the ideal employee. In this instance, you need to know your audience, just like a business must know its audience. And Merrill Lynch, they want someone with a lot of business experience, someone that's comfortable in highly professional environments, can sit down in an office with some billionaires and chat money and not be intimidated, or at the same time also instill confidence in them. So that's the person you want to be in that moment. I think that's pretty straightforward. So let's flip this. Oh, I didn't go to that slide. That was the answer slide, sorry. Okay, Rolling Stone. Now we're going to a job interview as the creative director at Rolling Stone. Which one of these people is well dressed for that interview? Okay, I won't make you guess, it's obvious. Now the person on the left suddenly is professionally dressed. The person on the right would probably lose that job the second they walked in the door without opening their mouth. The person on the left, what is their dress telling you? This person is dressed to show creativity. They're still put together, great haircut, it's a put together look. So this person is highly professional, but what their professionalism is telling you is, I'm incredibly creative. I understand art and music. I can push the envelope. So, just to sort of break it down, if you were to just generally ask, just put it out there, which one of these people is more professional looking, people would generally just assume, oh, this guy on the right, really snazzy dressed professional individual. But the answer is not that clear. These are both highly professional people, but in very different contexts. And that is how I would, a very simple way to just illustrate how crucial branding is. You need to make decisions as a person how you portray yourself, and companies need to do the same thing. If your audience is Rolling Stone, you better look like the person on the left. We'll get more into how you actually determine how you should look, because authenticity is important too. We all know that if you force something or do something that has nothing to do with how you actually are or believe, like, people smell that and it doesn't work. So you can't pretend you're the person on the left if you're really the person on the right. But at a fundamental level, if you're trying to be the creative director for Rolling Stone, you're going to do better looking like this. If you're trying to be, a money manager at Merrill Lynch, you're going to do better looking like our friend on the right. And so, again, that's just like a very high level analogy to look at visual branding. Any questions about that before we move on, or is that helpful? I'm a fan of analogies. All right. Okay, so we have an understanding, we just discussed, like, at the very high level, why a brand matters. And I think we can all sort of understand what that is. So then actually looking at the elements of a brand, what goes into a brand. And I'm not talking necessarily, there are many ways you could look at this. In some way, there's logo, collateral of various kinds, different kinds. There's like the deliverable elements of a brand. But I'm speaking more about like the strategic elements that go into defining your brand successfully. Now, there's no one way to go about this. This is just one chart that I think is useful in thinking about this, but it's definitely not the only way to look at it. In this view of brand elements, we break the brand down into sort of three meta categories, which are the brand core, the brand positioning, and the brand persona. And strategically, you sort of want to move left to right. And I'll just talk through this quickly. So at the core of a brand, you need to understand why you even exist in the first place. And this is something that is really easy for some companies, and others don't necessarily have a clear understanding. If you ask, hey, why did you start your company? The answer might be like, I wanted to make some money. Not a good answer. That is not why you started. I mean, if that's why you started your company, you're probably going to struggle. It's like, you need to have a real, what happened in your life that made you want to start this company? Or if it was a group of people, what was the realization you had that made you feel this had to exist? And I guarantee you, for the vast majority of people, it's not, I wanted to make money. Whatever, we all want to pay the bills, but that is not a brand purpose. So once you kind of say like why you exist, then what's your vision? Where do you want this thing to go? And that's the vision you want to define. And then values are sort of like the guardrails that you would take to get there. So I know why I exist. I know where I want to go from my foundation. But what are sort of like the guidelines that I'm going to follow to get there? And those would be your values. Things that are fundamental to the path that your company is going to travel. So once you sort of understand your brand core, you can better understand your brand positioning. Now, people may start a company knowing their audience immediately. I might think, I want to be a kids book publisher. My audience is children. Well, when you actually go through brand core exercise and understand your purpose, vision, and values, you may actually find you have different, your audience may be different than you would assume. Perhaps it turns out you're actually making ironic kids books for adult hipsters, and your audience is actually 35-year-old, people in Los Angeles and Mexico City, and that's your audience. You thought it was 7-year-olds. Nope, it's 35-year-olds. That's just thinking off the top of my head. But And you can also have multiple audiences. So, that you don't have to be stuck to one audience, but it's crucial to define who your audiences are. And, the market. So like what you're actually selling to these audiences and your goals within that. So what are you trying to achieve with these audiences? What goals of theirs are you helping them achieve too? And so that's sort of the brand positioning. And then the final element, once you understand sort of the core of your brand, once you understand who you're talking to and what you're accomplishing with them, then, you're ready to really talk about your brand persona. And that is, the personality, voice, tagline, again, like tagline, that could be any number of things. But point is this is like what you're truly communicating into the world. So, how should you speak to this audience? What your purpose is, what your audience ideally wants now. How do you speak to connect those things? And so that's really where brand persona comes in. So again, this is subjective, but this is a pretty useful way to look at it, I think. So one more thing I wanted to talk about in relation to this sort of these elements of branding are internal versus external. For most of the time, we think about external branding. And that's this stuff on the right, really. Like the brand core that we were talking about, the purpose, vision, and values, you may convey that to your audience in some way, but you don't have to. The purpose of that is truly to speak internally to your own company. And then the positioning, the persona that you put out into the world, that's the stuff that you're truly conveying to the world at large to actually sell your services. So why do these two exist? We tend to think of branding and marketing purely as external. It's selling. You're trying to sell a service. So why even talk about internal branding and the purpose of that? And so I want to I'll start quickly with just a life, a professional experience, just one that comes to mind. I actually shared this earlier this week with Landon and Art, but I got to work on a branding project a few years ago with a car insurance company. Doesn't really matter what they sold. The point was that there was basically one massive insurance company that bought several small insurance companies, sucked them up, and made everyone work under the same roof. This created a really toxic company culture, because you can imagine you worked at this, little boutique company. The big company comes and steals away your business, makes you move to a new office. You have to work in their offices, talk their way. It created a very negative environment. No one was happy. Business was struggling, and these huge acquisitions that just happened. A lot of money was at play, and people were really freaking out. Like, this isn't working. What have we done? We've invested all this money, and we have this sort of, it wasn't a good environment for anyone. Just on a personal level, no one wants to be in an antagonistic environment, and professionally, they wanted to make sure their salespeople were motivated, that their messaging was clear, so that they could succeed, because it was all over the place. As a further example, in this instance, they didn't, since one company absorbed the others, they also absorbed all the product offerings. And so now they had all these different products that were all named different things. Anyway, point is, our job was to pull it all together. We gave them a new name, a new identity, new product names, new product organization, and the effects were incredibly profound. I got to go to those offices and see that they were legitimately, people had become legitimately happy to be there. There was a feeling that there was, a unity, and that there was a mission that they were all working towards now. They were no longer individuals that were sort of just battling it out under this random umbrella. They now were a group of people working together towards a common purpose. And it really did work in a fairly profound way. And anyway, it's easy to miss the internal element, to think that branding and marketing is just to make money. But oftentimes, to successfully make money, you have to have a healthy and happy company. And so that's where internal branding comes in. And it's going to be different for everyone. Like, obviously, we work with law firms, so it's not like the insurance model for the most part, but you could imagine a scenario where a larger firm, purchases a couple of other smaller firms, and you have the exact same scenario perhaps, and you'd need to go in there and sort of rethink how this whole thing talks about itself. So, and I just wanted to give one sort of fun real world example, because again, branding isn't the way we always think. So, like, for example, I'll just talk through this. I don't know if any of you ever heard of this. It's Ed DeBevick's. It's a restaurant that I think it might not be around anymore. I don't know. When I was a kid, it was like this thing you would go to do in Chicago. Like, I live a few hours away from Chicago, so that was the big city where I grew up. And it's a restaurant where they treat you like crap. Like that, it did very, very well. The whole goal of the place was like, they're going to yell at you if you complain about the food. They're going to tell you to get out. Someone might even like throw some French fries at you. You know, it's like that was their brand, and it worked. It made it wildly successful. And I thought this story from the guy who founded it was really cool. I'll read this quickly. So he writes, those of you fortunate enough to have passed through Toluca, Illinois during the 50s and 60s probably remember Lil's Homesick Diner on Highway 50. The Homesick knew how to feed you real beef burgers, no soybeans, homemade chili, fresh baked bread, pies, and plenty of good hot coffee. And Lil knew how to treat people right. Eat and get out. That was her motto. The Homesick is where I learned the short order business. And while I'm no Lil, I think I've made this place something she'd be proud of. So as Lil always said, if you like what you're eating, order more. If you don't, there's the door. And okay, so this is an example of someone who has a really, really clear purpose and vision. So, I mean, you could say fundamentally his purpose was to distill this experience he had working at Homesick Diner and turn it into something bigger in Chicago. And, you know, I mean, we'd have to talk to this person to truly understand the vision and all that, but you can see how having a really clear core identity played itself out in other. So now this over here is the internal core identity. You know, that quote is talking to the core of why this brand exists and what he was trying to accomplish. And then you can see it play out in actual messaging. You know, like this is their website right now. Eat and get out. What's new? None of your business. It's sort of silly, but it works, and it's been very successful for them. And you know, growing up as a kid, you're always like, everyone's like, "Oh my God, you're in Chicago? Did you go to Ed DeBevick's?" Hugely successful. So you wouldn't. It's sort of hard to imagine like a restaurant where people are jerks to you, but if it's well defined, anything can be successful. It's really about being true to the initial intent. All right. Brand exercises. So after talking about sort of like the elements and all this, like how do you actually get to, you know, what are some things you can do to help define where you should actually be taking your brand? I'm going to sort of skip past like the core elements. This all can take a really long time. You know, I guess when you're really going to define a brand from the ground up, there's even before you get to sort of like fun exercises, there's you want to actually undertake interviews, make sure you have done your research and understand. So I'm sort of jumping ahead in these brand exercises to actually like looking at like competitive analysis and things like that. So one crucial thing for any business to do is to judge itself against its competitors, understand where you exist in the marketplace. And a really, really simple way to do that is through competitor plotting. So you have an X and Y axis, and these can be anything. So I'm going to show two sort of silly examples. So one is, you know, we've made one of our axes more tasty and less tasty, and one more healthy versus less healthy. You know, for law firms, that it could be, you know, more expensive versus less expensive, and then the other metric might be, you know, more experimental versus more predictable. I don't, you know, like willing to take more risk in like litigation versus whatever. You can choose whatever you want and judge against it, but it just helps you know where you land versus competitors. So here we got McDonald's French fries. We all know they're incredibly tasty, but incredibly unhealthy. We can all agree to that. And then let's imagine we're the broccoli lobby and we're trying to see where we land against McDonald's. You know, we're going to be very healthy, and you know, some people like the taste of broccoli. It's not disgusting, but it would arguably not more tasty. This can be done subjectively, these kinds of exercises, just literally sit in a room with your team and talk through these ideas. You can actually do testing, though, of course, to see how this actually plays out in the real world. You can run surveys or do any kind of market research available to you, depending on your budget and the time you have available to you. Here's one that gets a little bit more, you know, maybe real world, and that's looking at beer. So you'd have expensive to cheap and cool to uncool. You know, the hip IPA from your local microbrew, super cool. Also more expensive. PBR. And then this is also how you can see who your real competitors are. So like Coors and the hip IPA, they're not really competitors. Like they're at opposite corners of this. They're talking to different people. If you're a Coors drinker, you do not care if it's cool. You want something cheap. You know, Budweiser, that is a direct competitor to Coors. It's like this is all my just subjective. There is no truth to any of this, but to me, Bud seems slightly less uncool than Coors. And I think it costs a little bit more money. I don't know. I haven't comparison shop between the two in a long time. But so these are direct competitors down in this quadrant. PBR, that's considered like a hipster beer, so it's a little bit cooler, but it's still a cheap mass marketed beer. And up here there'd be a whole cluster of smaller IPAs. Anyway, I've also adjusted these bubbles by like relative company size so that you can understand who are the big players versus the smaller. So you can go really deep doing this stuff. And again, this could be done with any industry and looking at any metrics for those industries. And this is just a very useful way to quickly understand who are your competitors, who are your direct competitors, because HIP, IPA, and Coors are technically competitors. They're not direct competitors. They have wildly different audiences who want different things. And by plotting like this, you very quickly see that. It doesn't take a large leap of the imagination to see they exist in different realms. So then taking that a step further would be a SWOT analysis. So, I won't dig too deep into this now, but this is something that almost any business has likely done, at some point when you're starting out, but it's you're looking at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And this is, another way to really think about your position versus the rest of your marketplace or your competitors. So just to quickly talk about what the things are that we're looking at here, strengths would be, things that are taking you towards achieving your objective, that are related to your like internal operations. So, it might have to do with like software that you have or some unique positioning. Maybe you have massive funding that gives you a ton of, freedom, whatever. A weakness would similarly be something that's internal to the company, but that is actually harming your ability to achieve your objective. And so that might be like lack of clear communication hierarchy or something like that, something that's making you unable to operate how you'd want to. Then external origin ends of things would be the opportunities and threats. So things external to your company. So opportunities might be, some new, new technologies coming along that's going to allow new capabilities in your operations. So like, bam, that's an opportunity. We know that's coming up. Or, for in the legal realm, the laws changed in relation to legal marketing practices. And now there are new options for ways that you can actually market a law firm. That's an opportunity. And that's the kind of thing that in our specific work is really important to us and for our clients, is understanding those kinds of opportunities. And then threats, very similarly, like market conditions that change external to your company. So a threat could be, two direct competitor companies join forces, and now you have a mega competitor bearing down on you. That would be a threat. Or similarly, there could be negative technology changes that make it so a service you're offering isn't needed anymore, or something that would be a threat. So this is the kind of thing that you just literally sit and go through a company's leadership team with, and you gain a ton of insight by just talking through these things. And in turn, once you understand your SWOT analysis and you've really thought about where you land versus your competitors in the marketplace, right away you've gained you will through that process gain an immense amount of insight into how you should be considering, thinking about yourself in the marketplace. So I'm going to quickly jump back to here, because basically the stuff we've talked about, the brand positioning stuff, is here. These exercises are looking at your audience. Actually, we haven't really talked about audience yet. Sorry, we'll get into that in a second. We've talked about market, and then from that, you'll really understand your goals, especially by the SWOT analysis. Once you understand where your opportunities are and where your strengths are and the things you're attempting to avoid, that can really help define these goals. And by looking at your place in the marketplace against competitors, you gain a lot of insight. I jumped a little too soon. We'll talk about audience now. Again, in the exercises, I sort of skip the brand core element. There are a lot of exercises you can do to tease out the purpose and vision of a company. That sort of is, that's like a conversation for another day. But let's talk customer segments now. So this is audience. So like I said, there's not one audience for a company. So for example, let's talk in the legal world. You might be offering services that would be a solo attorney versus a legal tech startup. So this is something that, for 1-400 would be relevant for our own operation. And I've just put in really, really basic stuff here. This, you can go incredibly deep with this, but essentially the first part of customer segmentation is very simple. Just who are your customer groups? And then you can start by simply breaking them out into a spreadsheet like this. You can get a lot more creative with it, but this is not a bad starting point. One thing that I didn't put here that's very useful, that I should have put here, is to also, for each customer segment, estimate, and well, if you can, use hard numbers, but at least have a general idea of how much revenue each category is worth for you. And if you can, how much time they tend to take. Because then that helps you understand who are your best segments and who are the segments you should hone in on. If, you know, if one segment tends to bring in less revenue, but takes up a lot more of your operations time, that would be a segment that's a drag on your bottom line right now. Whereas if another segment is, provides a ton of value to you and brings in a ton of revenue, but takes less time, it's a sign of a really good audience segment that you should double down on. So going through this process and thinking out what segments audiences you actually talk to can also help you determine where you should actually focus your efforts in the marketplace. Like maybe one of these audiences shouldn't even be dealt with, whatever, who knows, that's what you have to go through the exercise to really determine that. But then for each audience segment, you try to understand a little bit about where they are in the world. So discovery, that would be, how do they find you? Their needs, that's pretty basic, like things they need, their hopes, fears, and question. And the first question, this is one I personally really like. So let's go through once. Like we'll imagine a solo attorney looking for legal marketing services. That would be appropriate for us. How did they discover us? Google search. Maybe they're starting out in their practice. They don't have a huge referral network yet. So they just hopped online and looked up law firm marketing and found us. Great. What are their needs? They're a solo attorney. They need more clients. They're growing their practice. Their hope is to grow. Again, I'm keeping this really simple. There can be many, many hopes, or very complex hopes or fears. What are their fears? No new clients, no money coming in. So their first question is going to be, hey, I saw your website. You guys look pretty good. Can you make me money? It's going to be, that's going to be their question there. Flip side, a legal tech startup is going to have a different process. So, they might have found us through a professional referral. They're a startup that has a history in the industry, and they've got, funding. So they have a professional network. Someone referred them to us, and we're chatting now. So what are their needs? Their most immediate need is a second round of funding, perhaps. They've already got their initial funding, and they're sort of working towards that next round so they can truly scale up. Their hopes are to stave off competition. We'll imagine they're a startup in a highly competitive area, and their whole goal is just don't let the competition drown us. Their fear, loss of funding. They're afraid that if they don't stave off the competition and see some success, they're not going to get that second round of funding, and then they're dead in the water. And their first question, hey, can you get me an initial user base? So, crucial to staving off competition, getting that second round of funding, they better have some users using that. So that's going to be that might be their first question. And again, this is going to change depending on the conversation you have. And every situation is going to be different, but that's just an illustration of how you'd sort of walk through that process. So once you have each audience defined, you want to think about what their customer journey looks like. And I know I'm sort of like hopping through industries in this presentation. I wanted to show that that this works for sort of everything, but I hope that's not too confusing, so that we're not like sticking with one example of how these things look at. So here we're looking at an example I found that someone had put online of shopping for a new car. What the real goal here is to understand from the moment someone discovers you, what the process is to them actually ideally becoming a client, and then eventually becoming even an advocate for you. So in this specific example, I guess we're just looking at a person who's going through the process of determining if they're going to buy a car. So they see a TV commercial. That's the consideration phase. They explore. They're going to get online, do some digging, and actually look at cars in their budget range. They're going to do some comparison shopping. Blah, blah, blah. And each level of this, we're also going to, what this chart's showing down here is sort of their internal ups and downs. We want to, at each one of these stages, imagine the mental state of our potential client, so that we can anticipate what they're going to need. So, in this example of shopping for a car, our potential customer here, he's really excited at the consideration phase. Like, oh my God, I'm going to buy a car. Sweet. Super stoked. But in this instance, they're saying this website looks much different from the commercial. Wamp, wamp. But again, that's where plotting out a path like this and anticipating how your customer feels plays into how you're going to handle your messaging. So now we're getting into starting to talk about things that will relate to the voice and the actual messaging. So it's like, if we know that the average person, if we're selling a car, for example, and we know that the average person coming to our site for the first time is incredibly excited because they're motivated to buy a car and they haven't been bummed out yet because they haven't started to think about the finances, what do we want them to experience when they first hit that website? The excitement of buying a car. You'd want to connect with that. And then if you get down to the point where you imagine when they're going to, if I'm thinking of myself and I'm a car dealership, my website, I want it to be exciting and impactful. And anyone who's bought a car has actually gone through this process. They do this. The website's always like, bam, exciting looking car on the cover, big, bold, super fun. And that's because you're amped. Their customers are amped to buy a car. This is fun. As you follow the customer journey, though, eventually you're going to end up in a seat at that car dealership, and that's the negotiation phase. I'm now not even paying attention to what's on the screen. I'm just talking because this is, each instance is different. But let's imagine now that you are a company and you're thinking of how your branding operates. And now you're imagining this person has been so excited. They've found the car they want. Oh my God, so excited. Now you sit down and it's time to haggle over buying the car. No one would call, well, some people enjoy that process. I'm not one of them, for example. So you'd have to anticipate when money becomes real, the conversation changes. So if you were that car dealership, how do you change the branding in your car dealership location to help people deal with that emotional process? People are going to start getting stressed. The couple's going to start arguing in the corner about what they can afford or not afford. How are you going to manage that as a brand and make sure that you've anticipated that part of the process so that you're not just letting those people be stressed out in a corner, you're somehow guiding them through that process as a brand. And so for attorneys, this is super useful too, just thinking about our own, like in our instance, working in law, very easy to make some clear guesses about the mental states of your client base. It's for a lot of legal stuff, it's not necessarily positive. A lot of the time someone has experienced something that's, trying or concerning or scary for them, and they need some legal help. So, for everyone that's going to be a little bit different, but understanding the mental state of the people coming to you, you need to account for that. You don't want your behavior and the way you present yourself and your marketing materials to be reactive. You want to be prepared, understanding, or at least making a very educated guess about the mind state of someone who's coming to talk to you. And so that's what a customer journey map really is. There are many ways to illustrate this. I wouldn't actually say this is the best one I've ever looked at. It's just a nice, clean example of how you need to think about each stage, from someone first seeing your name on a Google search to landing on your website, and actually even before they Google your name. What were they thinking that made them Google your name? Then what happened when they got to your website? They fill out a form. Great. What happens next? Okay, you're actually having a consultation with them. Now what's going to happen? Okay, fee agreements in front of them. What are they going to do now? Great, now they're a client. How do you ensure they stay happy as a client and then ultimately become an advocate? Write a wonderful review online and send you referral work. So you want to literally plot that path for each audience. Okay, the last thing I'm going to talk about here are brand archetypes. And so this is totally getting into the last, just to shoot back real quick, into the last area here, really talking about the personality and voice. Like, we're now 100% in that. This is a very, very subjective area for the most part. It's, this isn't a science. This is like, you want to base it on, solid subjective beliefs that are, based in real experience and have some reality to them. But this isn't 2 + 2 = 4. This is definitely sort of like touchy-feely stuff, but very, very useful in figuring out how you should position your language. And so let me explain a little bit what these actually are. So the brand archetypes are 12 different archetypes. I believe this is like from Carl Jung or something. I can't remember right now. It started as like a psychological thing, or in psychiatry, but got adapted for marketing and has become incredibly popular. Basically, there are these 12 different archetypes, and the general concept is that every single brand you've ever engaged with ideally fits into one main category. Now, you can end up in situations where a brand might, have multiple archetypes, you ideally wouldn't want to go past like 2 archetypes or so. And if you're really lucky, you can just hone in on a single archetype and be like, this is our identity. But most brands out in the world, you should be able to plot somewhere on this. And each one of these has, sort of like a description. So for example, I've got descriptions on a different screen here. If we're looking at, let's find the jester over here. The jester description is the goal of the jester is to bring joy to the world. The traits are fun, sense of humor, lighthearted, mischievous, irreverent. A drawback to this kind of brand, they could be seen as frivolous or disrespectful. So what is their marketing niche? To help people have a good time or enjoy what they're doing, allow people to be more impulsive and spontaneous. So an example of that would be Ben and Jerry's. That's an example given here on what I'm reading. It's a great one. It's like Ben and Jerry's. It's pure goofy fun. They're just going to enjoy some awesome ice cream, and the names of the ice cream are silly, and there's really wacky visuals, and it's just really colorful and fun, and it's just pure enjoyment. And that, so that's a really easy one. It fits right there. And so as a brand, once you've understood that, and again, this is built on all these other things, but like if you're Ben and Jerry's and you understand that that's your goal, to bring joy to the world, you can really start to see very quickly how that would play into your marketing materials. So you're lighthearted, you have a sense of humor. So sure, let's make sure all of our ice creams have a pun in their title. We want them all to be plays on words and have little jokes built into them. Anyway, and you can go about this in a number of ways. Determining your brand archetype could be done in a conversation as a team. Literally talk through the definitions of each of these and just determine, hey, which do we feel we are? That would be sort of the quick way. You can also literally take, brand personality tests or undertake full other exercises to do deep dives into how this would apply. And I would say that in any industry, this is useful to consider. I mean, it's going to be very rare that you'd ever end up with a law firm that was a jester, but you might have a great difference between a law firm that is like a sage and would be helping with understanding, to perhaps someone else who is, ironically, the outlaw, which would feel very wrong for a law firm, but the outlaw can be liberation. So like, let me pull up the definition of, actually, no, there wouldn't be many. I spoke a little too soon. To break rules and fight authority. You're not going to find too many law firms that would be that either, but you might actually find an instance, where I guess to fight authority could be relevant. If you're, I don't really, I'm trying to think of an example right there, but the easier one would be something like the hero to help improve the world versus, let's see, the ruler to create order from chaos. So those would be two different brands that you could see that existing in the legal world. One is creating order from chaos. So that might be a corporate attorney helping companies navigate complex either corporate litigation or maybe some restructuring issues that are highly complex. And so they want to show, that attorney, if that's the core of your work, you'd want to show like, I can create order from chaos. Whereas again, if we're the hero to help improve the world, maybe that's an attorney who's focused on, something more consumer oriented, or, dealing with environmental issues, or something that's more focused on that sort of thing. So anyway, point is, this is a useful exercise for anyone, no matter what your industry is. And I sort of had fun. I'm not in any way saying this is what 1-400 is, but just for myself, looking through these and thinking, for ourselves, for 1-400, what are we? And this is not in any way, I'm just doing this to illustrate, a great example of what we would be is, could be the sage, and that would have to be determined as a, through deeper investigation. But, the goal of the sage is to help the world gain wisdom and insight. And what's one of our core mission is, to make law accessible to all. And that's our own sort of brand core. That's, sort of the mission that we're on. And so, by everyone having access to justice, you're allowing them to gain that level of wisdom and insight to actually take control of their life from a legal perspective. And that may not be us. I'm just sort of having fun here to illustrate how this could work. And if we were the sage, the positive traits would be naturally intelligent, knowledgeable, and reflective. And the things we'd want to avoid would be appearing like lost in the details. Like, you don't want to be overly stuck in being too eggheady. You want to make sure you're still connecting with people and not lost in the minutia. And the marketing niche specifically would be helping clients understand their world through practical information and analysis. So, as our clients are attorneys and legal tech clients, we'd be helping guide them towards, guide them through their own marketplace by, through the use of practical information and analysis. And, brands that play to this same archetype would be, Google, BBC, University of Oxford, Mayo Clinic. These are sources of information. They're sources you can rely upon, and they're going to guide you to the answer you're looking for. So again, not saying that's accurate. That was just me having a little fun to illustrate how one would think through this. And that is everything. 1 minute before I believe we were scheduled to end. Does anyone have any questions or anything they want to share or their own thoughts? Again, branding, there is a light science to it, but it's highly subjective. So I'm not saying I'm right about these things, but these are the kinds of exercises and thoughts that I've seen to be helpful in branding. So anyway, any thoughts or questions before we close?
I'm curious about your background, your professional background.
Okay, well, I guess I'll talk really quickly about the path that led me to today. And I've shared this with most of you here, but I guess also since we're live streaming. So my background started I went to college and then studied anthropology and philosophy. So like just reading basically. And then I immediately jumped into doing music and was a professional musician for about 7 years. And toured and recorded and did all of that and really enjoyed it. And it was awesome, but ultimately came to an end. I had the record label I was signed to went out of business, and I found myself desperately in need of a job really fast. And I, through a Craigslist ad, ended up doing data entry for a email newsletter company, and found out I really liked working with them. Furthermore, the company had some seriously dislocated internal issues. Lack of internal branding, I know now. I didn't know this at the time, but a high level of confusion inside the company. And basically, I really hit it off with the owner of the company for some reason, and it was determined that I was the person that was allowed to talk with the development team. So I became the conduit between the marketers and their development team because everyone hated each other, and for some reason I got along with everyone. So I essentially became like a product manager, sort of, because it was just my job to be like, hey, this team wants you guys to do this. What do you think? Great, I'll go tell them now. It's basically my job. But I found that I enjoyed working in the digital marketing world, and I had a somewhat of a knack for it. And I actually found that a lot of what I learned in music production applied to any kind of creative production, including marketing. In music, a lot of times you have a creative who's sitting trying to record something, and then you have an engineer who's sort of like trying to get something else. And the engineer might, the musician might say, hey, I want my voice to sound like Purple Clouds. Can you do that for me, please? And they're like being super creative and artsy. And the engineer's like, oh, dude, what? How do I make Purple Clouds? All right, let me try this. And then the artist's like, no, that's totally wrong. And so you need someone in the room whose job is to bridge that gap. And that was always my job in the studio. I was always like the guy who knew just enough recording to do that, but just creative enough to talk to the person who wants Purple Clouds. And I found that was what I really loved in marketing too, which is why I've ended up in client services. In this instance, the client might be saying, hey, I want Purple Clouds. And the marketer is saying, dude, that's not possible. And so I enjoy being the person in between to figure out what might be possible. So then I went back to school, got a degree in digital marketing stuff, and then ended up at a startup in Los Angeles working in entertainment marketing. Then after that, I went to work for a branding agency. We worked totally in branding. And so that was a total shift, and I really enjoyed that. So that got away from advertising completely. I did like no advertising for my time there and just worked in branding with companies. And I thought that was, it's really useful for anyone to spend some time doing branding that's in marketing, because like oftentimes in marketing and advertising, the core elements of branding get forgotten because it's easy to just focus on selling and like sort of stop thinking about all these core elements. But ultimately, it was time to move on from that company. I enjoyed the nature of the work, but just really wanted a new opportunity, and then found myself with 1-400, and I really loved working here a lot. And and we do focus on it. It's nice to be back doing more things, not just branding. So now, working with more more active marketing out in the world, but I still always love branding and love talking about branding. Anyway, long answer to your question, sorry.
Thank you.
Have you already applied all this analysis process to yourself?
No. I've been a miserable failure at branding myself. I'd have a lot more money probably if I did this better for myself. I'm kidding. I'm perfectly happy, but no, I've not done this for myself very well. Yeah.
Okay, so
Anyway.
I think that's it. I really want to thank you, Nick. This presentation was really interesting, and I think everyone who watched it is gonna learn a lot of insights on branding, and it's gonna have a clear path that they can take. So this was amazing, and I want to thank you everyone who joined, and we hope to see you soon in the next Lunch and Learn.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys. Bye bye.